Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I just wanted to share a thought that I had this morning while I was studying in regards to the way that the church is balancing its time in the modern age. So it could be the case that you've grown up as part of, or you are currently a part of, a church that spends a lot of time focused on doctrinal disputes between itself and, say, other denominations in the world or in its community. This particular church spends a lot of time preaching to, having Bible classes about why its doctrine is correct and why other people's doctrine is incorrect, and they need to repent and to come to the true church. And if there's any outreach done by this church, a lot of that outreach is in regards to writing articles or having debates with people from other denominations, other Christian traditions. And let me just begin by saying that doctrine is important, and those debates, those discussions, those distinctions need to be made, because God didn't write the Bible so that we could just ignore it and all agree to get along. It matters. God has always expected his people to respect his words and the commands that are found in them. So it matters the way that our churches are structured and the way that our leadership is set up. The roles of men and women and the way that they function, that matters. The pathway to salvation matters. The way that we worship matters. There's tons of things that the Bible spends time talking about, and we need to take those things very seriously. But with that said, let's ask the question, why is it that some of these churches are very doctrine focused? Well, I think one of the reasons might be because a couple decades ago, 50, 70 years ago, the United States was a much more Christian nation, if you want to say that. You got probably 90% of people affirming that they believe in God, the majority of people being associated with some kind of church, and a number of people trying to legitimately be a follower of Jesus in the way that they know best, and they're actually committed to trying to follow Christ. So if a church was to go out and to evangelize, say on the street, or you were to meet somebody in a coffee shop or on an airplane, and you were going to try to tell them about Jesus, most likely they would affirm that yes, they believe in God, and they probably are associated with some kind of church somewhere. And so if you both agree on those things, what do your differences come down to? Well, doctrinal differences, right? Denominational differences. And so those were the focus because those were the needs of the culture at the time. Unfortunately, though, and this is really the point that I want to make, I think the church has been slow sometimes to shift with the culture. Right? So there was a need to spend a lot of our time discussing those denominational differences back a couple decades ago. However, as we move into 2023, we're shifting into a post-Christian culture, not just in the United States, but in much of the world. And if we go out and evangelize in the world today, it's much more likely that we're going to run into somebody who doesn't believe in God, who isn't affiliated with the church, and who isn't taking their discipleship very seriously, or they're not committed to following Jesus, in any sense. And so the needs of the culture have changed. If we go out and we talk to those people, they're not going to be interested or even have a knowledge to debate the fine points of doctrine, right? You're going to be talking to them about foundational stuff and whether God is real and how suffering works in the world and how God can be explained and all those kinds of things. So I would make the argument that it probably doesn't make sense anymore to spend the vast majority of our time preaching to the choir within our four walls of our own congregation about why our doctrines are correct and why other people's are wrong. Again, there's a need for that, but does that need to be taking up the majority of our time? Probably not. We need to be preparing ourselves to go out into a non-Christian world to reach these people, because if we've seen one thing over the past decades, it's that these people are not going to come into our church buildings to hear our preaching and be converted that way, at least by and large. We're actually going to have to go out and evangelize. Sitting in our church buildings, in our conferences, in our gospel meetings, in our seminars, and talking about our doctrines and spending the majority of our time on that is kind of like being in a community of 1,000 people. You've got 50 people in your congregation that spend all their time talking about why the congregation across the street with 50 people is wrong, and they need to repent and start doing things the right way and according to the Bible. Like, yeah, you might want to spend a little bit of time talking about your denominational differences, but if you spend all of your time talking about those differences, there's going to be 900 people in your community who aren't being reached because you're not devoting any time to reaching them. And what's more is that if you're the 50 people in your congregation ever go out and engage with those people in the world, they're not going to be prepared to have the conversations that they need to have because all they've been focused on are those doctrinal disputes for so long. So we need to be rethinking the way that we're balancing our time. How do we reach this new post-Christian culture? And how do we engage with these people? And yes, doctrine's important, but also shifting and saying, okay, we need to be doing more evangelism outside of the four walls of our building. And if that means that we need to spend less time in this building, having Bible classes, repeating things that our people already know so that we can get out onto the streets or into the community or online and start reaching unchurched people who need to understand the basics of Jesus and why they need him in their life, well, then we need to make that shift. Otherwise, our numbers are going to decline. We're not going to be reaching anybody. We're not going to be fulfilling the Great Commission. We're just going to be sitting in our buildings talking to each other about why what we believe is right and everybody else is wrong. And last time I checked, that's not the Great Commission. So I just wanted to put this thought out here just to get people thinking about it and to get myself thinking about it. If you've been following this channel, I've shifted my channel somewhat to getting into the basics of the scriptures, right? Helping people to understand the basic Bible stories, basic summaries of what's going on in the chapters of the Bible. I've done a lot of verse by verse in-depth study, and I'm going to continue to do that. But I think the vast majority of people out here in the world, they don't even know who Moses is, right? And here I'm writing about credo baptism and digging into some verse in the New Testament, right? I'm certainly not saying that I have all the answers or I'm great at doing this, because I'm not. But I just wanted to put this out here because maybe if you're a part of a church like the one we described at the beginning of this video, maybe you can start brainstorming some ways that you can begin making that shift and how your congregation can approach the current age appropriately and in a way that will have more people embracing Christ rather than just affirming the beliefs of those who already believe in him, watching them pass away after a certain amount of time and watching your church shrink because you're not reaching anybody new. So again, doctrine matters, but reaching our communities matter as well. And in order to do that, we need to balance our time well based on the needs of the age that we live in. So that's all I wanted to say. Be interested in your feedback down below in the comments section if you've got any, and I'll talk to you later.